Thanks, Jim. Well, it's an absolute privilege to be here and to see all of you today. This is my first Scottish conference for Echoes, so I'm really excited about it. Shall I give you that one, Margaret? Thank you for being with us today and talking about this new book, Angola in My Heart. Just before I forget, if you'd like a copy, they're just to be found just outside there in the foyer. So I thought I'd get that really important notice in quickly. But I want to just talk just for a few moments about the book and about kind of what's at the core of it. Margaret, you're an author who's primarily been in historical fiction, is that right?
That's right.
And just you've got two main series before. What were those?
First one is a trilogy set in Scottish clan history in the 16th century, and a little bit of warish sort of stuff in it, but not the kind of, well, the families were warring for 140 years, so that's quite a long time. The other series is actually a two-book series, which is a fictionalized reimagining of the life of Martin Luther and his wife, Katharina von Bora, and they are written from the point of view of Katharina. Brilliant.
And as a Christian and an author, how does your faith play into your previous projects compared to this one, would you say?
Well, I've always sort of written on my website and so on that I'm a Christian first and a writer second, which means that the faith determines both how I write and what I write. So I quite often have arguments with people about, you won't find strong language in the books, you won't find any explicit sex in the books, and so on. But I also hope that even in the Scottish ones, which are not overtly Christian, though the Luther ones clearly are, that people will find nuggets in them, things that will make them think about questions like, does God exist? Can I get to know him? How can he impact on life? And I just hope there's enough in it that make people think.
Yeah, thank you. And so, turning to this book for a moment, this is a little bit of a departure from that. This would be your first biography that you've written. And it's obviously of Ruth Hadley, a name that many of you will know. Ruth's work in Angola was a very long period, and one that I think brought a lot of interest because of her her steadfastness and things. But just in case we've got some folks who are less familiar, in brief, could you give us a little sense of who Ruth Hadley was and what she did in Angola?
Well, Ruth, before she went, she was a gifted teacher. She was also incredibly sporty. She was on the cusp of joining the England hockey squad, expecting to play for her country. But she felt the call of God to give all of that up, give up her family, give up her friends, give up her career, and go out to work among the Chokwe's in northeastern Angola. And she hadn't been there terribly long when full-scale civil war broke out and the Foreign Office said everybody should come home, but she didn't. She stayed. She said, how can I tell people to trust God and run away at the first sign of trouble? So she stayed. And she wrote, and I've not got my glasses on here, so that's a wee bit of difficulty, but she wrote that none of them were the sort of stuff to be heroes or martyrs. And yet she was well aware of all the dangers that she would face, but if God had called her there, he would keep her.
Amen. And I think one of the things that struck me as I was reading the book was a comment that you made that Ruth was almost part of a new breed of missionary. I think that was your wording. And there is a sense in which a lot of what Echoes International is now and a lot of our priorities have kind of fit well with Ruth's ethos. And I won't go into that in any more detail. Read the book, enjoy it yourself. But obviously a very trying time, a very war-torn country, times when, as I was reading through, you'd read and you'd hear there was peace and then there wasn't peace, and so on. We'd go through this cycle. So there were many challenges for Ruth. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, there were physical challenges. A lot of time there was very little food. There was certainly no medical backup for most of the time she was there. Another lady, Mary Stewart, went out. She was there for part of the time helping to run a clinic. It was their little clinic was the only medicine available in an area the size of Scotland. So for many, many people, there was no medical aid. And for Ruth and for Mary and other missionaries who were around at the time, there was no medical backup for them either. So there was that kind of privation. There was also the privation of food. There was lack of water. There was the living conditions were somewhat primitive. She was there 18 years before she actually had a functioning toilet. I don't know how most of us would cope with that. And, she moved into a new culture, a new country, a new language. Learning a new language was obviously quite a task. But the Chokwees, at the end, when they were talking about her, said Ruth was one of us. And she spoke Chokwe like a native. And when she came home, visiting England, she found it hard to think in English because she was so immersed in their culture.
Yeah, and that sort of brings us on to my next question, which is around the legacy that perhaps Ruth has left for mission, and maybe a legacy in Angola, but also for those who supported her, those who heard about her work. What would you say about is part of her legacy? You can't sum it up. Again, read the book, but give us your thoughts on that.
I would say two main things about legacy. She was asked at the end of the war, there was about 20 years of that civil war, she was asked by the Angolans to teach their children, because of the wars of independence from Portugal and followed immediately by civil war, they'd had 40 years without education in any of the rural areas. So she oversaw the building, the equipping of 4 rural schools and the training of teachers. And one of the schools is regarded still as the best school in the area. So her legacy in terms of education and literacy for women and for children is immense. But more importantly than that, she saw that many, many of the churches, they had nobody who could read, or they maybe had one person who could read, and there was generations of young men who had very little Bible knowledge. And so she set out to do Bible studies with them, to do discipleship courses with them, to teach these young men so that they could become the church leaders of today and tomorrow. And there are about 400 young men who have came through her classes and who are now, they are the leaders of the church. And the Angolans would say that is her biggest legacy, that she has provided them with a leadership so that the churches can continue and be soundly taught.
And that thought of a spiritual legacy is a really interesting one, isn't it? And I think, we can see the spiritual legacy that Ruth left in Angola. I think there's also a case, perhaps, when we look at missionaries, and it gets to the heart of why we write missionary biographies. I suppose there's a sense in which they can leave a spiritual legacy for us who read their stories. And we can't help but research their stories, in your case, or in our case, read the story, and we can't read it in isolation. We can't read it in a way that's objective and detached, can we? It leaves a mark on us spiritually. It perhaps feeds us spiritually. How would you say that's happened with you?
Well, it was... there's a hymn that is actually in the front of this book written by City of Light, which I'm sure most of you know, called Yet Not I, But Through Christ in Me. Now, that wasn't written until after Ruth had died. But as I read through that hymn, I thought, one, the different stanzas kind of relate to different parts of her life in Angola, but also I think it would describe exactly what Ruth would have said about herself, that nothing she did was done by her, but it was all through Christ in her. And I think that's relevant for all of us, wherever we are, whatever we're doing, that we can't do anything for God on our own, but only through Christ in me.
And thank you, Margaret. I think that really sums it up as well, and I think it was a great choice of a hymn to begin the book with. I've actually taken the liberty of beginning this afternoon's last session with that hymn, so we'll sing that one together. But
Actually, I should say thank you to City of Light, because they freely gave us permission to put that hymn in the book.
Yeah, that's a good acknowledgement there as well. And be encouraged by the story of Ruth Hadley. But thank you, Margaret, for joining us today.
Thank you.